this was just a roller coaster ride that the Steelers clearly wanted to get off. And I feel like we have to frame the trade in that way because it informs what the Cowboys are getting here. They're getting a very, very talented receiver, a guy who is a perfect schematic fit for what they need.
What is going on, Sharp Football family? It is your resident Swami of Konami, Rich Hribar, and we are now well over a week removed from the NFL draft. Rookie drafts are largely wrapping up. Dynasty leagues are basically had their fun week of movement that everyone comes in and they haven't logged into the site for a few months, and we're starting to see that shift of emphasis now to the 2025 season. In general, rosters are taking almost full shape. The official schedule release is next week. Best Ball Mania 6 opened up. Everyone's kind of got their eye on the prize, and you're starting to see analysis on like the actual season now. As a reminder, you can find a breakdown of all that analysis in our 2025 draft kit at sharpfootballanalysis.com. Tiers, rankings, projections, draft strategies, all that stuff. You use promo code SHARP5 to get you $5 off that draft kit. We'll be upgrading all summer. With that housekeeping out of the way, today I am joined by the true alpha target in the fantasy space, the paterfamilias of wide receiver knowledge. You know him from Reception Perception and Yahoo. He is the great Matt Harmon. Matt, how are you, brother?
Rich, what's going on, man? Yeah, this is a great time of year because number one, I love actually the post-draft analysis of rookies a little bit more than the pre-draft stuff, even though, once you get past the draft, you feel like you want to take this big collective breath. But at the same time, this is the time of the year with Reception Perception where I'm charting the year 2 wide receivers. So, man, it's really fun. I feel like I'm learning a lot, but at the same time, when you start talking about things like Best Ball Mania has opened up and the schedule release, I'm like, damn, man, that makes it feel like the season is too close. And I need to feel like it is months and months away. So mixed feelings here right now, but I am very happy to be talking to you as always.
Yeah, I want to do something different because, obviously everyone reaches out to you. You are, like I said, you are like the guru now. You've turned into like, from the early days of, doing podcasts with me and Chad, pour one out for Chad. He's still with us, but, pour one out for Chad. Of course. And look at you now, man. I mean, dude, you're like, I see you at the Super Bowl, like, talking ball with Malik Neighbors and all these dudes. Like I said, you are the dude. But we woke up this morning and we had a trade that involved a wide receiver. So, perfect opportunity. The day I'm going to have Matt on the show, George Pickens ends up getting moved, from the Steelers to the Cowboys. The Dallas gets a 2026 6th round pick in Pickens, while Pittsburgh gets a 2026 3rd and a 2027 5th in the swap. So right now, I'll just kick it off to you since I did like such a lengthy lead in, and people want to hear from you anyways. I'll drop some stats in a little bit, but your initial take on one, what's the actual perception of George Pickens, the player Dallas is getting, and then we'll talk a little bit about this move and how he kind of congeals with what Dallas is going to do offensively.
Yeah, it's funny when you host a podcast 5 days a week during the season, and also host 2 other podcasts as I do for Yahoo and Reception Perception. I feel like you start to naturally have like a love-hate relationship with writing, and so I don't know if you feel this way, Rich, but that is certainly how I feel at this point in my career. Like I love to write, but I only love to write when I have something to say. And man, I had some stuff to say about this George Pickens trade, so I wrote like I think almost a 2,000 word article for Yahoo this morning on it because it's really complicated. And I feel like you have to start this with the Steelers angle of things because I feel like it informs just like where we're at with the George Pickens experience. And, Pickens, it's kind of funny because I feel like he's a guy that I wouldn't say I've been mixed on over the course of his career, but I've wanted a little bit more from him throughout the first and second portions of his NFL, like first and second season of his NFL career. And then in year 3, in the month of September, I thought he was putting up by far his best film. Like I charted several of those games for Reception Perception. He was smoking man coverage, and it wasn't just on the plays that he typically does, like the routes that he typically wins on when we're thinking these vertical outside the numbers routes. And he still was excelling on those patterns, but he was winning on like quick slants. His release moves were really good off the line of scrimmage. And he put it in the box score in week 4 against the Colts. And man, ironically, after a week 5 game against the Dallas Cowboys, again, because he's now a member of the Cowboys, that is sort of where it all fell apart. He was on the field for just under 60% of the snaps. If you watched him play, the film was disgusting from like an effort perspective. And then he had a really strong stretch of games with Russell Wilson as the starting quarterback, but then he gets injured. He has a pretty, again, rough effort-based game against the Kansas City Chiefs on Christmas Day. He goes catchless in their final game of the regular season when they lose to the Cincinnati Bengals, which included 2 drops, multiple miscues at the catch point. And then he's held to 1 catch and an offensive pass interference penalty in their playoff loss where they got blown out in the first half by the Baltimore Ravens. And then he picked up some catches in the second half and whatever. But doesn't that just sort of describe the George Pickens experience where it's been this up and down roller coaster? And to me, this is on the record on my show multiple times. I thought like this was headed towards a divorce all throughout the offseason. And after talking to people at the scouting combine, I was dead set he was not going to be on this team in 2025. So I was not surprised that he was traded, because this was just a roller coaster ride that the Steelers clearly wanted to get off. And I feel like we have to frame the trade in that way because it informs what the Cowboys are getting here. They're getting a very, very talented receiver, a guy who is a perfect schematic fit for what they need. They need an X receiver. They need a guy who's going to win against man coverage on the outside to allow CeeDee Lamb to do all of the things that he does really well working across the formation. They need somebody who's going to win on deep outside the numbers targets as that vertical X receiver. They also need a guy who can beat man coverage on quick routes from the perimeter, from the boundary. Like the Cowboys were in a dire spot at their wide receiver 2 position. And now they're in, he's not one of the, 2, 3, 4, 5 best number 2 receivers in the league. I could probably name other guys that I'd rather have there, but he's certainly one of the better now number 2 receivers in the NFL as George Pickens. But again, it would be stupid to talk about him and not talk about the up and down journey that has been his career so far. So kind of a complicated trade to break down, but the bottom line is, like, if we're tagging this as something, it is no question a risk. You have to acknowledge there's a risk for the Dallas Cowboys, but it is 100% a risk worth taking.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about Pickens and the way he started his career, because, obviously this is on paper. When you look at this, you're like, you bring up everything that I think the public has nailed, that, like, they needed an X receiver. They wanted this vertical target. Since Pickens has come into the NFL, no player has run more go routes than he has. Just a little bit under 500 go routes through 3 years. 28% of his targets have been 20 or more yards downfield. No player has more targets with a higher rate than Pickens over that span. There's some guys with higher rates like Alec Pierce, but they just don't have as many raw targets as Pickens either. But I kind of wanted to start there and say, like, well, how much is that is on Pickens and how much of that is on the systems he's been a part of, and can he get some of that ancillary production? Because the one thing about CeeDee Lamb is he's not a slot only player. He's a guy that occupies and attacks defenses from all levels of the field. He's what we want in today's era of the NFL, where the meta has changed to more, primary zone coverage. We want our guys to get easy targets. We also want them to get vertical targets still too. We want that marriage of everything. We talked a little bit about this. I remember you and I years ago, like when Cooper Kupp exploded, right? And like he was not just getting slot targets, he was running those deep corners in the system and like this. And then Amon-Ra St. Brown came out. Now everyone's like, well, we need guys like this. You look even like Jamar Chase. And I kind of want to have that comparison right now is because we were at this spot a year ago with T. Higgins. And T. Higgins, the Cincinnati Bengals had moved on from Tyler Boyd, and everyone's like, we know what T. Higgins is. He's just a strict X receiver. And no one kind of acquiesced to their projections of Tyler Boyd being gone and saying, hey, what if Jermaine Burton and Andre Yoshevich can't get like those types of targets? And it turns out they didn't. And we've seen T. Higgins make this adjustment where he got enough of those shallow targets and kind of had this blossom of his game, and it made him like a really good fantasy player. Because one thing we know at Dallas is like this Dallas team's going to throw the football. And like, do we have a chance where Pickens could potentially have like and be like a T. Higgins-esque player to CeeDee Lamb? Because Jamar Chase is the one that got he kicks, his slot rate just gone up every year, and he's turned into that player we let off, the guy we want. We know CeeDee's still gonna be that guy. Can Pickens be like that kind of player?
Yeah, I think he can, like at his best. And that's what's so frustrating about him is that I don't think we have seen his best over a consistent stretch in the NFL yet. And look, like this should be the moment, right, where he is all the way locked in. He's in a contract year. He is apparently how it's been, kind of phrased is that he has decided the one that he's not going to get. He doesn't want to sign an extension this year because he wants to be a free agent next year. So this is the moment for him to really, again, be locked in. It's going to be the best quarterback, the best offensive ecosystem that he's played with in the NFL by far. And there's certainly, like, to me, it's not an excuse if he is slacking off and and I don't think he's like a diva necessarily. I almost think he's a little bit of a misunderstood player, and just that like he's so focused on.
So he's a wide receiver.
Yeah, he's a wide receiver. He's not whether he's a diva or not. He's definitely like misunderstood or whatever. He's just a bit of an odd guy, and he's also just so dialed in on what like he is doing in that one-on-one isolation matchup between him and the defense that he almost like. I saw John Ledyard phrase it today, and I thought this was really good. He almost like kind of forgets about the 10 other players on offense, which isn't a good, like, I'm not saying that's a good thing. It's something he probably needs to get out of and be more within the flow of an offense. But like, again, this should be the moment where he's all the way locked in. He's dialed in. And I think if he can, like, you go back to his prospect perception profile, he was winning on like curls, slants, digs, all the like base NFL routes. We didn't see that very much early on his rookie career, but he's gotten steadily better throughout the course of his NFL time. And really, like, let's be honest, Rich, we've all watched some bad offenses over the years. I think we can put Matt Canada's Steelers offense like at the very bottom of the totem pole for that one. So like all the go routes and everything he did in the first couple of years of his career, you almost kind of have to throw that out. And I do think that what the player that we saw last year showed us in those flashes that he can be someone that can really earn and win on underneath routes and targets.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was really drawn to it with the transition. And, Dak Prescott, by far the best quarterback he's going to play. Even if he just sticks to those like outside vertical targets, I mean, he's, Dak, since he entered the NFL, is fourth in rating on those throws, 20 or more yards downfield. He's number 8 in accuracy on those throws. This is a player that's the only quarterback he's had more than 60 career targets from through 3 years in the NFL is Kenny Pickett. Like, this is a significant upgrade. And we talk about the volume. Like, he's going from a team. The Cowboys ran 100. They had 100 more dropbacks than the Pittsburgh Steelers, right? And with their
quarterback injured too for the vast majority of the season.
And when you look at their running back situation too, like, we know this is a team that's going to have to throw the ball, right? Like, and Brian Schottenheimer maybe gets a rap for those Seattle days of being attached to Pete, but since we've seen Brian Schottenheimer recently, like, he's been a lot more pass heavy in his recent, tenures. Obviously the 2 years he's been in Dallas already, they've been in 2023, they were over pass rate expectation. They're actually a little bit below it last year, probably because they didn't have Dak Prescott for a good portion of the season. And then you go back to 2020 is last year at Seattle. They were just minus 1% below expectation. So this is a team that's going to throw the football significantly more. But the problem now, we leave with George Pickens, with just, DK Metcalf stuck in Seattle in that same situation now in the Arthur Smith offense. And we saw DK Metcalf, who is a player I know you did chart for the trade. Obviously, he's one of the players that you did chart for last year. And I wrote about this multiple times during the season about last year. It was really crazy to see DK Metcalf, the flip in usage he had in that offense last year with Ryan Grubb, who unfortunately one and done Ryan Grubb in the NFL, he had no answers, right, for like the shortcomings that Seattle offense had. Like, he literally was just running a system. I mean, DK Metcalf runs over 30% of his routes as, getting deep targets, by far the highest rate in his career. He had none of those fantasy smoothing opportunities that we now want our wide receiver to have. And now, does he get those in this Arthur Smith offense? Just ignore the quarterback situation for a second. Yeah. What kind of routes is DK Metcalf going to run? Because we just went through what George Pickens was doing.
Yeah, see, this is actually where I was kind of bullish on the idea of him as Arthur Smith's X receiver, DK Metcalf, because and now it's just so much smoother to talk about because Pickens is not in the mix. And like, again, I've thought the receipts are out there. Like, I've thought since February he was getting dealt. And now we can actually talk about it in reality here. I do think that the routes that Arthur Smith wants his X receiver to run are really good for DK Metcalf. So if you go back and look at AJ Brown's 2019 and 2020 reception perception profiles with Arthur Smith, 45% of his routes were slant, dig, or post, in breaking routes. Those routes also make up 40. Yeah. Off the play action. Again, vertical shots there. Those routes also make up 49.5% of Drake London's routes in his rookie season in 2022, when that offense was actually working kind of well for Arthur Smith in year one with the Atlanta Falcons. And again, I think DK Metcalf is coming off of his worst season as a pro. Like I think in addition to all of the areas that you pointed out that Ryan Grubb fell short, he just wasn't a very good fit for the kind of straight line X receiver that, I mean, he is like DK just kind of is a straight line X receiver, but it was very 9 route heavy. It was very like curl route heavy, work back to the quarterback. That's not where DK has ever been all that great, but he was especially not very good there last year. And like I said, just bottom line, I think it was a poor season for him, but the routes that he still shows up pretty well on are slants, digs, the post route as well. So I actually kind of think he fits well working on those in breakers, just snapping routes off and working horizontally in Arthur Smith's offense in particular. Are we going to get sort of like those layups and gimmies and things like that you mentioned? Yeah. Probably not, because it's just like not that type of offense. But I think when he does have weeks where he hits, he will hit pretty big.
Yeah, I look at DK Metcalf as a guy like in these best ball mania, these best ball drafts, like he is the prototypical best ball receiver, right? Like I want to soak up those big weeks when they come, and then not have to deal with the volatility of the weekly lineup, because he's gonna be one of those players that may has like a 3-week stretch where you're just like, oh wow, this usually had more than 6 targets in the month of November. I'm now going to be drawn to bench him for whatever hot receiver. And then he has the 3 touchdown game. And you're like, oh my God. Because we've all been there, like with that archetype of receiver. So like, I do kind of want to grab him in some of these spots here, try to soak up those big spots. Because no matter what, even with Mason Rudolph, we saw even Calvin Ridley have spike weeks with Mason Rudolph. Granted, we'll see if Aaron Rodgers wants
to. We saw George Pickens have spike weeks with Mason Rudolph at the very end of that like tenure there.
Yeah, absolutely. So we know that DK is still gonna have those big moments there too, but it is kind of funny now how you have like that parallel here. But yeah, that's kind of a fun breakdown here. Good for George Pickens, good for Dak Prescott, I think, in terms of a fantasy stance. Probably also good for DK Metcalf in terms of just understanding that he's just not going to have the competition. We might not get the overall volume and like the specific usage we would want like a number 1 wide receiver to have, but you're also not going to pay for DK Metcalf in the same price point where we have had to pay for him in previous years as well, which is kind of nice too, that we're also pricing in some of that again. So don't double count everything either as well, which is always important to remember.